In our next few videos, I'm going to talk about using our adjustments, which can be used to, of course, retouch some photos. And so what we want to do to get started here is we are going to go grab our F2 photo, which is contrast and brightness, and we will open it in a new window, and then we will download it. And then once it's open, we'll open it in Photoshop and then get started. So the thing I want to stress for you when you're doing adjustments is that there are technically two places that you can do adjustments. However, they are different in a very important way. So the first one that you can do is you can go to Image and go to Adjustments, and you're going to see all of the same adjustments that we have over in our adjustment panel, which can be found over here on our panel options on the right hand side of our screen. The difference is that if you go to Image Adjustments and use any one of these are again what we call a destructive filter, which means that you cannot edit them anymore. You can do it one time and then you can't change anything. If we use our adjustment layers, which are over here, these continue to be editable. So I'm going to show you first what I mean by this, just like I did with our filter gallery. And then I'm going to tell you the one that I prefer that you use. But I just want you to know, because a lot of people tend to use their menu bar more than I do. And so I always forget that it's an option, that you can go up here to adjustments and make changes. It's just that you can't edit those anymore. So first things first is if I go to adjustments and say brightness contrast, what happens is you get this little brightness contrast dialog box that pops up. And so with brightness contrast, let's talk about this image real quickly. You have what really is a really nice shot. It's nice and clear. It is actually a pretty sharp image anyways. But the one thing that we have happening here is we have an African American student that's against a night background or a black background. And so you start to lose distinction between their head and the background. And so what we can do is use our brightness contrast adjustment in order to try to create some distinction between that. So I just want you to see what happens when you drag your brightness slider to the left or to the right, and how that changes things. So brightness obviously increases. The thing that you have to be careful for is you don't want to go too far, because if you go too far, notice kind of what happens. Particularly if you either drag your contrast up or down, you tend to start getting, it almost looks a little grainy, what we call noise in our image. So we don't want to have that happen, because if you have that happen, then the picture kind of looks distorted almost. So we don't want to do that. So I kind of like where we're at right now. I've got my brightness at about 111 and my contrast at a -18. And you can see that now we have some distinction between our gentleman's face and hair and the background. Because when we were back at 0, that wasn't there. So what I'm saying here is that if you use this adjustment, remember I went Image and Adjustments and chose Brightness Contrast and I click OK, that adds what's called a destructive adjustment to this photo. Which means that if I went back there and I went to Image Adjustments and Brightness Contrast again, notice that it doesn't say -111 and -17. It starts you back at 0. So if you tried to continue editing, you're actually going to almost overexpose the image when you try to get back to even 111. So that's what I mean when I say that this using that way is destructive. So instead, what I want you to do, let's go to our history panel and let's go back to our open. Instead, what I'd like you to use is your adjustments panel. So if you do not have your adjustments panel open, remember you can go to Window and then Adjustments, and that panel will open right over here. Now, of course, the downside is you do have to start to learn what these little symbols mean, but lucky for you, you just hover over it and it pretty much tells you. So the first one is our brightness contrast. It looks like a little sun. What I want you to do is click that, and I want you to notice what happens. First off, the same brightness contrast dialog box pops up. It just looks slightly different. And secondly, what happens is that you create what's called an adjustment layer. So what I want us to do again is bring our brightness back up to that like 111 where we were. And then I'm going to drag my contrast down to, I think it was like negative 17 or 18, something like that. And then you can just pop your properties back in so it's out of the way. And this is what I'm saying is that if once you get your photo in and you're like, okay, I don't know, maybe I need to make a little bit of an edit, all you have to do is double click on that adjustment layer and notice that it's right back at 110 and negative 17. So if you can say, actually, I want to bring this up a little bit to like -3, I can do that. Or if I want to bring my brightness down a little bit, I can do that. I can click off, do some more things over here, and still go back and edit this if I need to, okay? So this is why I really stress to you to use adjustment layers, because it allows you to continue editing. Now, the thing I will say is that when you add an adjustment layer like this, if you have multiple layers, this adjustment layer will affect everything beneath it, okay? So if you needed to, you could clip this adjustment just into the layer that you need to, and then you could make changes based on that. And maybe if we have time, I'll show you that later. But for now, I just want you to know that this is the way that I prefer you to make retouching adjustments. And so you can see now the difference if you hide and show your adjustment layer, what that brightness contrast does to the photo and how much better it looks when we use our brightness or our contrast. So typically we're going to use those on underexposed or overexposed photos to try to be able to save them, because without a little photo retouching, we probably wouldn't put this photo in the yearbook, just because it's hard to even see his face. But with a little photo retouching, we can make that happen. So, for the sake of showing you this, notice that right now we have a JPEG photo. You can see up here it says F2 contrast brightness JPEG. If we were to go File, Save As right now and put it into our shared drive lessons folder, notice that the default format, I'm actually going to make a Photoshop F folder just because. Notice that the default is a Photoshop. And does anybody know why? Hopefully you said because we have 2 layers. So the thing to keep in mind is that if you felt like you needed to continue to adjust this photo, you would want to keep it as a Photoshop file. If you felt like your image was as good as it was going to get, then you could go ahead and save it as a JPEG. However, you will get that warning symbol again that just says, hey, just as a reminder, you have multiple layers. So if you save it right now, you're going to end up with just one. Remember, JPEG compresses everything down, flattens everything. So I just wanted to show you that. What you choose to do is up to you. And we'll talk a little bit more about it when we get to making our spreads. Because remember, Photoshop files are bigger files, so they take up more room. So we don't want to have too many of those because they slow things down for us. So you can close your brightness contrast image, and we'll go on and learn about our next retouching tool.